Hey everyone, I hope you're well. So today I'm going to talk about something that I've been thinking of, and I guess I was kind of debating with myself about making this video because it really doesn't have much to do with what I usually talk about in this channel. So if you want to see more videos like this, don't subscribe because it's not going to happen again, probably, who knows. Yeah, listen, so I have a huge issue. And I'd say that hate is a strong word, but actually I think I do really hate the way that we think about children and the way we act towards children in society. And I want you to know that just because I'm pointing out things that I think are wrong doesn't mean that I think you're specifically a bad person if you've done it. Like I'm saying, like the title implies, I think these are social problems, so I don't think it's a case of like people just like individually being bad. And I'm gonna talk about mostly things that I think are wrong but tend to be sometimes are socially acceptable. So I'm not, don't be surprised if I'm not gonna mention stuff that is not like a big issue, or like there's bigger issues than what I'm talking about, because I'm specifically talking about things that you can necessarily go to prison for. But of course that doesn't mean that something isn't wrong just because it's not illegal. So I think one of the main problems that we have in relation to children, or one of the main issues that adults are a part of, I guess, the problem in relation to children, is the way that we don't take their problems seriously. And let's give one example of an issue that children tend to face oftentimes, which is bullying. In Cheyenne Lynn's video, she mentions the 2011 documentary The Bully Project, which seems to exemplify the way that adults react to cases of bullying among children. They will often resort to belittling the issue, blaming the victim, forcing the victim to forgive the aggressor, the perpetrator.
Cole! Cole?
What?
You are not going anywhere. He is offering his hand, and let this drop. You may go. Cole, I expected more.
Because he criticizes me every single day.
Then why are you around him?
I don't. He comes to me. I try and get away from him. He follows me.
Okay.
And they criticize me, calling me a P-U-S-S-Y.
Okay, honey, that's not right, and he shouldn't do that.
I don't even know
But
why.
you know what? He was trying to say he was sorry.
He already did, and he didn't mean it. We had
You
to
know what?
continue on.
You didn't mean it when you stuck out your hand out either. So that means you're just like him, right? What you don't like in him,
Except I don't
you,
hurt people.
by not
physically.
shaking his hand, you're just like him.
I'm like someone who pushes you into walls, threatens to break your arm, threatens to stab you and kill you, shoot you with a gun.
He apologized. And have you reported all that sort of stuff?
Yes.
Okay, then it's been
They
taken
told-
care of.
And all of them said, even the cop told him to stay away from me.
Okay.
And he doesn't.
All right. Can you try to get along? I think you guys might be really good friends at some time.
We were. And they started bullying me.
And this will often result in the bullying itself escalating because there's nothing actually being done about it. And the escalation often ends in someone either killing themselves or killing someone else as a result of this issue. And I think that is to a large degree because adults just don't take these issues seriously as they should. They don't do something until someone is hurt or dead, or until the victim themselves will retaliate and defend themselves, which is suddenly like going too far, but everything before was fine. And when you watch those clips from the Bully Project, you can see how infuriating it is to see all these school officials just constantly act like the issue isn't that serious, or that there's nothing that they can do about it that they haven't already done. And that they can control the behavior of children, for example, saying or basically excusing themselves with this idea because, or saying that, well, sometimes telling the children themselves, victims of bullying, well, what do you want me to do about it? What do you expect me to do about it? And even though that's basically their responsibility, it's one of their responsibilities as school officials to make sure that these things don't happen. And you often see them making these excuses and basically trying to tell the parents and the children that they can't do anything about it and that they're just gonna have to deal with it.
Seriously.
I'm gonna be honest, like, I am upset enough. I don't want him to ride the bus anymore.
What bus is he on?
54.
It's absolutely not acceptable. I mean, they're stabbing him with pencils and choking him, and
Buses are notoriously bad places for lots of kids. I wish I could say I could make it stop on that, but I'm not gonna lie to you. I can't. But what we can do is we can get him on another bus.
so if I put him on another bus, I have, what, little to no guarantee that he'll be safe on that bus either.
I feel real bad that this happened.
Send your kids to school with the assumption that if they're out of your care, they're in someone else's who's just as capable.
It's one thing that you need to start doing that you haven't done. How can we help you?
Yes.
Do you trust us that we'll do something when you tell us that someone's bothering you?
Oh, in 6th grade, you, did nothing about, Teddy sitting on my head.
On the bus?
Yeah, there's like a little knob you can, then once you unlock that knob, you can, like, lift up the seats. And he lifted up the seat, put my head in it, sat on my head.
How do you know I didn't do anything?
I don't know, 'cause...
Alex, did he sit on your head after you told me? I did talk to him. And he didn't do that again, did he?
No, but he was still doing other stuff after that.
Some cases of bullying are straight up crimes, like some of them are essentially sexual harassment or sexual assault, death threats, or just physical assault in general. Things that in the adult world they are absolutely crimes and you could even potentially go to prison for. But for some reason these things are things just children have to just learn to deal with. One of the children, even in this documentary, states that sometimes the school officials will essentially victim blame the bullying victim, saying that, if a kid gets beaten up at school, then he must or they must have done something to deserve it, and that they were probably bothering some child and that made the child retaliate, even though there's supposed to be this zero tolerance policy that makes it so that you can retaliate and such. Which is complete bullshit because clearly nothing is done, and if there's no options you will often end up retaliating. Another thing is mental illnesses or just general mental problems in general, like childhood depression or childhood anxieties. I can say that I've heard a few times people around my age say that they heard about a child having depression or something like that, and they're like, what can a child be depressed about? What can a child be anxious about? As if, for one, you don't need a reason to be depressed or anxious because it's a mental problem. Of course, as if children couldn't have real problems in their lives, as if only adults could have problems that are bad enough, quote unquote, to have depression or anxiety about. And the thing is, children can certainly have really difficult lives, not just just to name a few things that could happen. Of course, abandonment by your parents, divorce or separation of your parents fighting constantly if they are still together, one parent leaving you, abuse, just feeling lonely overall, having no friends, things like that. And really the list goes on. A lot of the problems that adults could have, children can very well also have. Just because they don't pay taxes and they don't have a job doesn't mean that they can't experience all these complex emotions that adults can also experience. And as is the case with bullying, everyone thinks that it's not that serious until someone kills themselves, and then it's like, well, adults often will respond saying something like, well, I knew things were bad, but I didn't think this could happen. Well, of course, because I think adults themselves, and even children, of course, have been socialized to think that their issues are just not that important, and that children just kind of have to get through the difficult parts of their childhood and they'll eventually just grow out of these problems when really they can face the consequences of those problems while they are still children. They don't have to just wait until adulthood for this problem to be over, to blow over, or to be solved. Another thing that I cannot stand is these double standards specifically regarding abuse and violence. Because of course, hitting an adult hitting another adult is almost like universally considered bad and abusive or in some way wrong, with very few exceptions. I mean, even the wording is completely different. If you talk about usually if you talk about an adult assaulting another adult, we call it that, we call it assault or violence or aggression or something like that. Whereas oftentimes we hide this violence against children, especially by their parents or other authority figures like teachers, under the names of like discipline or tough love and things like that. If you yell at someone, if you're an adult who yells at another adult in anger, you look bad for doing that, because that shows that you can't control your emotions. But for some reason, when an adult yells at a child in anger, that's not seen as a lack of emotions, that's just seen as discipline. And I think a lot of it is just complete excuses that people make for their lack of control of their own emotions. They're like, I don't know, I think some people have managed to convince themselves that their lack of control of their emotional self-control is somehow a good thing, because that will somehow teach their children through fear to obey the rules or to do everything as they say, or to, you know, be disciplined or whatever. And I especially hate this aspect of hitting and yelling at children, yelling angrily and such, because people have just the worst and just the dumbest excuses for it, and just cling to their subjectivity, to their feelings, to their experiences. And it also doesn't matter that it's part of a culture or that it's fine in certain cultures to beat your children, because I think at this point, as a civilization and as a society, we know that just because something is part of a culture or is part of a tradition doesn't mean that it's fine. Like, it being part of culture isn't good enough of a reason to keep doing it, despite all the evidence that there really is. You know, you constantly hear people say, well, I was hit as a kid and I'm fine, or my parents hit me, I'm fine, or I bet you've never had a child, because if you had a child, you would hit them too. Even though there's a lot of parents who manage somehow to not hit their children. I mean, incredibly, I know it's insane, but I don't know, somehow that happens. But for some reason, people are just clinging onto this idea by their skin of their teeth, even though the vast majority of studies and research and experts actually prove that this type of behavior is not just unhealthy in the short and the long run, but it's also not even effective. And of course, I understand why people are immediately defensive about this kind of thing, because the idea that you're a bad parent is obviously pretty unpleasant, or the idea that your parents were abusive at some point to you, well, it's obviously not pleasant either. But it's not just about you or someone else being a bad person, but rather the fact that these behaviors have been made acceptable socially, and they should not. You know, it's not about you or someone else being like a perpetual abuser or a perpetual victim. It's just about having done certain actions that, you know, don't necessarily define you as a person, but that doesn't mean that they were right at the time. And I don't think a good person is someone who has never done anything wrong in their lives, because I'm sure at least one person who sees this video is gonna think, well, I bet you probably yelled at someone before, or you probably hit someone in anger before. And yes, but you know, I do think that the part of being a good person, or at least trying to be a good person, is to recognize these things instead of trying to be in denial about the fact that they were wrong in the first place. And a lot of people will also give you this idea that like, oh well, I can raise my child however I want because they're my child. You know, when you raise your own child, you can raise them however you want. But the way that you raise your child is also my problem, and it's everyone else's problem, because your child is a part of the community, and they are certainly going to be a part of the community when they're an adult. So, and they're going to be unsupervised most likely by you. And if the way you raise them is somehow more likely to make them more violent later on in life, then of course I don't want you to be able to raise them that way. I mean, it's just logical. Another issue that I see oftentimes is considering children as nothing but pre-adults. And I know some of you are probably thinking, well, of course, children are basically pre-adults, but they're also people in their own right. And I think they should be awarded kind of an appropriate degree of autonomy in their bodies and their minds. One example is that we often want children to live by our rules and to have the same rules and kind of the same restrictions that adults have, with the reasoning that they're going to be adults at some point, therefore they have to get used to these rules and they have to get used to these restrictions. And a lot of those things are not things that really it makes any sense for them to need to get used to anyway. Like not letting children dye their hair or get weird haircuts or things like that. And usually the excuse is given like, oh, well, at work you can't have hair like that, so you can't have that. And it's like, it's a child, they're not working, they don't have a job, they're just at school. And for one, that's not even necessarily true, because it depends greatly on the specific job whether or not you're allowed to have a certain hairstyle or a certain hair color. But also those rules have been changing quite fast in just the last decade, so who knows what they're gonna be allowed to do or to have their hair like when they're old enough to be working. Not to mention that a lot of those hairstyles that you supposedly can't have at a job when you're an adult, you actually can have at a job. Like for example, long hair in men is pretty much widely allowed in jobs, with some exceptions if it's just kept tied back. And keeping in this topic of long hair in men and general rules for boys, specific to boys in school, usually schools that have uniforms will have not unisex uniforms, they have uniforms that are divided by gender, which is very odd to think of. This is another topic altogether, but it is kind of odd to think of the fact that uniforms are supposed to make everyone seem equal and yet they're also divided by gender. But you know, the point being that boys are not allowed usually to wear the girls' uniform, but usually girls are allowed to wear the boys' uniform if they just don't feel comfortable wearing skirts. But usually the boys are not allowed to wear the uniforms because apparently a lot of us are just not ready to see a boy in a skirt. And a lot of the times the public reactions to these proposals, like letting men have skirts, wear skirts to school, or rather boys again, usually the reactions are going to be like, oh no, what if they don't want to? And it's like they always word it in this way, as if they were being forced to wear skirts, and they are not. Just as the girls are not being forced to wear pants when they don't want to. They simply can, it's just an option for them if they want it. But I think it's worded as something that's being forced to happen because people, the public, just don't have any other arguments against it that don't sound completely ridiculous. And again, the same thing with long hair. Usually the only reason why it's truly banned, and they never tell you this, but the only reason why it's banned, it tends to be because it's strongly associated with kind of rebellion, at least when it comes to long hair in boys specifically. But in reality, it has a lot of different associations. Like cultural and religious associations to long hair in boys and men that don't have anything to do with being rebellious or anything like that. And I know I've been saying that religion or culture isn't good enough of a reason to do something, but that's when something is potentially harmful, and there is nothing harmful about having long hair regardless of your gender. And really, I think self-expression is good enough of a reason on its own to want to have long hair or some other specific hairstyle, because there's nothing inherently wrong or harmful about it. But the one thing that I wanted to get to with this is that why do children have to abide by the rules that we set specifically for adults, especially in just these specific jobs where they hopefully only have these rules for the sake of safety and, or you know, other rational reason like that. And sure, the point of school, where they usually will not allow children to dye their hair, the point of school is to prepare children for work and for life in general by giving them knowledge and skills that they will need later on in life. But having natural hair with like a specific acceptable range of hairstyles isn't a skill set or a knowledge or anything like that. If your hair is blue when you're 17, and you have to get a job at 18, you have to, you know, get ready for a job interview at 18, you don't have to like go through this process of like this whole skill set or anything like that just to get your hair dyed back to brown. It's not necessary. You can just, it takes like maybe 3 hours at most to dye your hair back to brown, depending on the length of your hair. But the point is, it can be done in like just one day. It doesn't matter if for out of high school you've had blue hair, you can simply dye it immediately after. I've never heard a single good argument as to why we shouldn't allow children to have something as harmless as blue hair. Of course, dyeing your hair does damage it a little bit, but it's not permanent damage. And it's really just aesthetic anyway. You can just grow back, you can cut it off when it grows back, it's not a huge deal. Another example is a situation that has happened more than once already where, you know, on different groups, Facebook groups where I'm in, and this is one of the main things that made me want to make this video, where, let's say I'm in a Facebook group where it's mostly women, and we usually talk about like cosmetics and things like that. And it's happened more than once at this point that a woman will ask for advice as to what to give her daughter who just hit puberty and she started to grow hair, and she wants advice on what to give her to shave or to wax or what have you. And some people will kind of like help as much as they can, you know, be as helpful as they can. But some people truly are only there for morality, you know. They're just gonna be immediately like, you should teach her to accept her body hair and just tell her that it's normal. And it's like, that doesn't fix any of the issues though, and it's not helpful in any way. Because the thing is, can you imagine, I mean, put yourself in this child's shoes for a moment, okay? She grows body hair, she wants to shave it, and she doesn't want to be seen at school with, let's say, armpit hair or leg hair or something of the sort, or maybe even facial hair if she does grow some of it. People would probably make fun of her for it, and she doesn't want to have the hair regardless. And why are we insisting that she should keep it? Why should we not allow her to just remove the hair? I mean, most of us adult women, we know that we do have this choice to just remove the hair or keep it. And I do think we should, you know, normalize hairy legs or whatever, because people just have hairy legs naturally most of the time. But that doesn't mean pressuring women or girls to not shave or preventing them from doing it when they are obviously not comfortable with the idea and they do want to do it. And as a child, you obviously depend on your parents to give you things like razors or shaving cream and maybe tell you how to shave in the first place, which who knows. I mean, of course there's a lot of tutorials on YouTube, but there's also a lot of bullshit too. It bothers me because it makes me think that some of these women want body hair to be normalized so badly that they want young girls to not shave, and it's like, you can't force it like that. Like, why are you okay with potentially exposing them to scrutiny, to judgment, just because you want something to be more common? And unfortunately, even some people said something like, oh well, it's the mother's choice if she decides to let her child shave her body or not. And it's like, no, it's not the mother's choice, it's still the child's, because shaving is not such a life-changing thing that you need this parental guidance, like this adult to make the decision for you. It's not that serious, it's not plastic surgery or anything like that. And granted, if I had a child and she said that she won't shave and she's prepared for the backlash, I wouldn't try to pressure her into shaving either, because it really is her decision in the end, and I am supposed to support her regardless of what she chooses. And I'm saying this because I don't think it's good either to forbid a child from doing something only because they could potentially face backlash for it, if that's your only reasoning for forbidding them. Another thing is children being essentially used as vessels for political views. People are constantly, of course, very concerned about what children are watching, about what children are exposed to on TV or even at school. And I think a lot of this protection is legitimately people wanting to protect children, because of course things like this are sometimes concerning and they do happen and they are worth talking about. For example, family vloggers exploiting their children for views, is obviously an issue, and there's a lot of videos about it, so it wouldn't make sense for me to go on about it. Some of it is honestly complete bullshit, okay? Like not wanting children to learn about what being gay or transgender is at school. A lot of these children are inevitably going to be transgender or gay or whatever themselves, and you'd basically be giving them the potential understanding of who they are in terms of identity. And even if they're not that, they could simply know that these people exist, and that's it. But for some reason there's this idea that if you do so much as just tell them that these people exist, then you're basically forcing them to be one of them. When in fact learning about what these are, about what it means to be gay or transgender, can also give you the certainty that you're not like that, when you may have been a little bit confused about that before. There's actually a video by Jamie Dodger, he's a trans man, where someone comments in the video under it that she felt for a while that she might have been transgender, but it was through watching videos by transgender people that she realized that she wasn't, and that her feelings, that the things that she experienced really came from something else. But it was precisely learning about being transgender that helped her, and that potentially prevented her from making a bad decision of transitioning, which of course you do still have to go to therapy if you want to transition anyway, and psychologists and psychiatrists have to assess you and decide that you really are a candidate for that. And the thing is that a lot of people think of being transgender or being gay as somehow being more sexual and somehow more perverse than being straight is. So they think that it's inherently something more inappropriate for children. And of course, it's more important for children who might be non-straight or who might be trans to feel accepted than it is for children to necessarily know all the ins and outs of what it means to be either trans or gay or what have you. But it's also very clear that a lot of the transphobia that you find out there comes from sheer ignorance. A lot of these people don't even know what it means to be transgender. They wouldn't be able to define it if you ask them. They don't even know the difference between being trans woman, trans man, and they know they don't know, and they don't care, because just the sheer word just makes them afraid, and they immediately just feel fear and associate the word with all of these things. But how can they know that it's wrong and harmful when they don't even know anything about it, besides like a few headlines, ridiculous, inaccurate headlines probably that they've seen on Facebook a few times here and there. Now, don't get me wrong, these people aren't the only ones who might use children as like vessels for like think of the children type views. But I think we should constantly consider the fact that what we want children to be exposed to and to not be exposed to is so strongly tied to what we believe society should be like, and the kinds of things that we think should be acceptable or not acceptable. Because of course, if you think transgender people shouldn't exist and being gay is an abomination, then of course you don't want children to be exposed to it as something neutral, not even good, but just you don't even want them to know that it exists. And if you do think that transphobia or things like that are a huge issue, then you probably do want children to learn to accept it, or at least see it as something neutral and not inherently bad while they are being raised. Another thing that I think has been very commonly normalized is lying to children and hiding things from them. And it's something quite close to my previous point, because a lot of people have this really harmful obsession with this idea of quote-unquote preserving their innocence, preserving a child's innocence, not by preventing abuse, which is what you would think that the phrase refers to, right? But they're talking about keeping children ignorant or confused, specifically about issues like sexual education. I hinted to this a bit earlier by talking about, being gay and such in school. But a lot of people will often respond to, children don't need to know about these things. Children don't need to know about being gay. And, well, they don't need to know about being straight either, but it's constantly in all media. Most media that is directed to children has some degree of straight romance going on in there. And that's not quite necessary, but it's also not inherently wrong. And this specific lack of, gay representation has also led to children growing up not quite understanding what it is about them that is different, and sometimes even thinking that there might be something really wrong with them, and not understanding that they are maybe gay or transgender until someone calls them a slur at school, and they figure what this slur means, and they start to figure out who they are based on that because someone at school insulted them. And I know that a lot of people think, or at least they pretend to think, that talking to children about sex makes them easier for them to be groomed or abused, or it makes teen pregnancies more likely, when evidence seems to point to exactly the opposite. Children who are abused, I mean, even if you think about it, ignoring all this evidence that is already out there, children who are abused often feel like they have to go with whatever any adult says, and that they can't tell anyone. And they might often have this vague notion that anything sexual is bad, therefore they are involved in something bad, therefore they shouldn't confess to it, or else they could get punished in some way. Because they know just a bit about sex, which is that it's bad, or it has this bad or wrong association, but they don't know quite enough to understand that they're being abused. And overall, among these issues, they're just a general idea that children cannot be trusted with information, assuming that these arguments are even used in good faith and they're not just homophobia or what have you. Another thing that I think is a huge issue, not necessarily very often talked about, is this problem of over punishment and humiliation as punishment. Just taking extreme measures to punish children and teens for stuff that they aren't even quite developed enough to understand why it is wrong. And look, I never said we had to treat children exactly as if they were adults. We don't have to, and we probably shouldn't in most cases. But why do we then expect them to understand and know things that they're not even psychologically or socially ready for? And then we punish them for not understanding those things. I mean, you're gonna do more damage in the long run, especially by this overly hostile punishment. I remember a while ago there was this viral video of a parent whose child was bullying a kid who was bald from cancer or something like that. And the parents, what they did was to shave their child's head against their will. And a lot of people were like clapping and saying, yes, this is how you do parenting. Is it really though? Because what is it actually teaching them? It's not actually teaching them to not bully. And of course, there's always this idea of like teaching them a lesson, but is it really teaching them anything, or are you just breeding resentment and a lack of trust for the child in their parents? Same with parents who punish their children for things like talking to adults online sexually, for example, which there was also in a case of this parent who filmed themselves punishing her child in some way because she was, I don't remember now, but she was very much a minor, like 13 or something like that. And she was, I think, sexting or something like that with an adult man. I mean, there is something wrong with your child that you have to address if they do that. And by address, I don't mean punish them or humiliate them, because this mother, I think, was like filming her, telling her, essentially shaming her publicly in front of millions of people, telling her about what she did. And it's like, how the fuck do you expect to keep a healthy relationship with your child after this? I truly don't know. And like I said again, maybe at some point this child had this vague idea that sexual stuff was like vaguely wrong, but they didn't quite understand. Of course, given their age, they aren't able to quite fully understand or why it's wrong for someone of her age to have this kind of relationship with someone who's an adult. And it's something that a child probably can't even fully understand until she herself is an adult and she looks back at children or people who were her age. And she goes, oh my god, I can't believe that an adult would do this, would, speak to a child like this. And the thing is, sometimes children don't really understand, are not even sometimes told what exactly is wrong with a certain action. They just know that it's something their parents don't want them to do or other adults don't want them to do. And that's another thing too, when you punish your child or you forbid them from doing certain things only because you don't like them or they annoy you or whatever, or because you want to, have power over them and just forbid them from doing things for the sake of it. At some point, they're going to start to blur things together. They're not going to be able to tell when you're forbidding them from something because you want to protect them and when you're forbidding them from something only because you can. And if you really don't want them to do something that is truly wrong, you should tell them what exactly the problem is, not just the fact that you will punish them if they do it. Like, let's say that you want to make sure your child doesn't drive drunk when they're teenagers or whatever. You'd have to tell them, hey, you can easily die or kill someone, or you can go to prison, and when you get arrested, nobody's going to save you. You're going to prison, you're fucked. But of course, the thing is that if at this point you've been overly strict and you've been deceitful even to your child, how are they gonna be able to tell that you're not just lying or exaggerating once again? And of course, children and teens know that their parents are probably not the only adults who have forbidden certain things, and that other adults do also think certain things are bad decisions and such. But what I'm trying to get to is that if you make a lot of really irrational rules that only pertain to what you find annoying or that you find inconvenient or that you don't like or that you just personally find to be wrong but doesn't actually harm anyone, for example, you're making it so that your child kind of has to take what you say with a grain of salt. They can't just immediately believe you about whatever you say is right or wrong. And of course, a lot of teenagers have this issue of thinking that whatever bad things can happen from a certain action probably won't happen to them. But you're certainly not helping the situation by basically putting all of these different scenarios that you don't want them to do all in the same level. I remember there was also this woman who was really proud to say that she told her female child that if she ever masturbated, she would get pregnant from that. What do you think is going to happen when she hopefully gets sex education and she realizes that her mother was lying to her for whatever stupid reason, like she didn't want her daughter to masturbate? She's gonna know you're lying to her and that now she can't believe things that you say to her. Her trust in you is now broken and it's gonna be difficult to get it back. And listen, just as a conclusion, I don't claim to know everything. I don't claim to be a child psychologist expert or whatever, and that I think these are things that we have not really been talking about enough and that we should change about the way we act towards children, for their safety and also for just their own human dignity as people.